the group had 20. The alleged criminal activity, and that the alibi had actually matched, and that it had been suppressed by the policeman, Mr. Nyararai. So you will recall that this was a journey walked by a lot of innocent people who were in custody, even when it was clear that they ought not to have been arrested in the first place. And they did subsequently get back until the application for charge, which was successful in respect of, I think, 22 of the then accused persons. And then the others were put to their defense. You'll recall that Rebecca died in custody during the trial, which left the current accused persons and others. There were 7 of them who ultimately were put on their defense. And at the end of the trial, there remained the 4, who are the 2 here present, Mr. Natarikwa and then Yvonne Musarura. Yvonne subsequently got presidential pardon, maybe about 2 years ago. And Natarikwa, who had been convicted on being an accessory after the fact to public violence, also had a fine, so he was able not to go to prison at the relevant time of the conviction. The 4 that were convicted went through a very gruesome process of trying to get the record to be ready for the appeal. We filed the appeal soon after the convictions in 2016. In fact, the appeal was filed in December 2016. But to get the record ready was such a struggle. And because this was one of the longest trials at the High Court, and the record spans some 2,462 pages, it was just so frustrating not to get a correct record, because each time we went to check, we'd find that crucial evidence had been excluded. And therefore we then get that process going until ultimately the record was ready in 2019. We filed our heads of arguments in October 2019, and the case was heard on the 3rd of March 2020, and the decision made on Friday. You can see the snail pace at which our justice system works. Yes, it was a case with many accused persons, but once the others got out of the picture, the process ought to have run a bit faster than it did. And so we are now talking really about persons who were in custody from May 2011, with a very short stint when they got bail, and then they were quickly indicted so that they would go back into custody up to last Friday when they were released. So we're talking, in fact, about a good 10 years in custody. And that is a very long period, especially where the Supreme Court has now found that they ought never to have been put on their defense. So when all the others were discharged, I think that was in 2013, or was it a bit later than that? It means they ought to have been discharged then. So from the time they spent in custody when they were unjustly put on their defense to last Friday is a time that was unnecessary. I think all of that we had many bail applications that earned people like my colleague Charles Kwaramba very strong words from the trial judge, who refused them bail on the basis that the state had a strong case, it had eyewitnesses. But during the trial, the eyewitnesses disappeared, and Nyararai, the inspector who had been claiming that they have eyewitnesses, started talking about informers who had no names, who had no identities, and who were never called. So it was obvious that there never were any eyewitnesses in the first instance. These were just lies that the court was fed. In my view, when a court is told over a long period of time that there are eyewitnesses, when those eyewitnesses are not produced, I think a court has a duty to state in very, very strong language that the police should not mislead the courts. If at the end of the day there are no eyewitnesses, when you've been telling the court that there are eyewitnesses, there ought to be consequences for that policeman, and there must be severe censure. We know that that did not happen because a certain conclusion was desired. There are also allegations. All of you will remember that when the arrests were done, he actually had a broken wrist, and his hand was in plaster because the police were violent and beat him up to such an extent that they fractured a bone on his arm. The magistrate ordered that there be an investigation into that, and we all know that nothing came out of those investigations. We know that not a single sentence was written by the trial judge to deal with that clear assault, which ought to have earned those who were responsible time in prison. My view is that where that happens, really the courts have to be very, very strong in making it clear that when you assault suspects, you must face the criminal consequences of that. You'll also recall that he was also assaulted when he was in Matapi, and the police claimed not to know who had assaulted him, and yet the police were the holders of the keys to the cells. They are the ones who opened the cells to whoever assaulted them. Again, the courts have been completely mum on those grievous violations of their rights. Being a suspect is not justification for ill treatment and for assaulting persons that the law presumes to be innocent. So I feel very, very strongly that our justice delivery system is not strong in getting the police to do things properly. So Nyararai will go and do exactly what he did with these guys in future because there's no consequence for him. The only thing that he probably got was a promotion. He probably has a higher rank now. And so it means we'll have these violations going on over and over and over again. I think those will be the comments that I will have until I hear what you guys want me to talk about.
Thank you, Madzokere. Colleagues, Madzokere giving us a briefing in terms of what transpired regarding last Maengahama to Madzokere. Are there any questions from members of the media for Madzokere through the last Leo? You can identify yourself and pose your question where you are coming from. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm Leo from newspaper.com. Ma'am, 10 years these guys in prison, and then they are found not guilty. What is the Teleshara's next move after having their clients spend 10 years in prison?
Well, it's not so much the Teleshar, it's them, because the Teleshar merely follows what they instruct. So I don't know whether they have exercised their minds, whether they want to sue, and it should be something that we would have to look into once they have digested the effect of their release and whether there are people that can be sued. But I mean, from what I have said, you can see that I hold a very strong view that certain of the police officers deliberately misrepresented facts for purposes of ensuring that they are unjustly convicted. And sadly, the trial judge also fell into the error of believing literally everything that the state said, even without justification. There were also instances where he actually reversed the onus of proof and said, I'm putting you on your defense so that you can explain, where you were, etc. So I feel very strongly that certainly the prosecution was malicious. It was known at all times that misrepresentations were being made. The reference to available, eyewitnesses was, we know, was deliberately meant to mislead the court into making certain decisions. And the court was misled in all the bail applications I have referred to. So if they decide to sue, I believe that there would be justification for that.
Thank you. We are joined also here by Charles Kwaramba, one of the lawyers who represented last 22, Charles Gokam.
Right.
Also in regards to this, Rosalind Hans at the back, Director for Zimbabwe Lawyers Human Rights. More questions if there are any. LJ, introduce yourself and field your question.
Okay. My name is Lavjim Tungi from 26 Richard. The two spent 10 years in jail and subsequently got their freedom. Does this give credence to the courts? Does this mean that you believe in the court system that maybe one day justice will be served, no matter how slow? Because you talked about the slow pace of the justice system, but eventually they got their justice. Do you still believe that the courts are doing well?
Well, if the courts are doing well, they wouldn't have spent 10 years in custody for a crime they did not commit. But did the Supreme Court come to the right decision? Absolutely. On the evidence that was there, as the Supreme Court said, they should never have been put in their defense. There was an attempt to politicize this case, and in fact, there's one paragraph where it becomes very clear that the trial judge was being political, and he says things that are so political that you ask yourself, did that come out of the evidence? And I'll just read something towards the end of that judgment, which he said, Zimbabwe was, however, liberated 36 years ago in a just war of peace. It was a war to end all wars, so that Zimbabweans and all those who dwell in it can live in perpetual peace and harmony, free from exploitation and oppression. There is therefore absolutely no longer any justification for killing or abusing anyone in politically motivated terror outside the scourge of war. The judge had no evidence that this was a politically motivated killing. And in his judgment, he continuously refers to marauding MDCT youths, when the state evidence itself was making it very clear that this was a free-for-all by everybody who was at the shopping center. You had vendors there, you had car washers, you had bar patrons, you had people who were going about their business. So where he got this thing that these were marauding MDC youths, and you ask yourself, is Last a youth? He is not. Where did he get that from? Because there was no evidence to that effect. So this case was unnecessarily politicized by the trial judge. If you read his judgment, you ask yourself whether this was a judgment coming out of a political rally or it was a judgment coming out of a legal process. So clearly, there was an attempt at politicizing the case. To go and refer to the War of Liberation that ended 36 years ago, when you had not been addressed on that, when there was no evidence that this was politically motivated, clearly shows that our justice system tends to look at politics of the case, even without evidence, and the attempt at pinning this unfortunate death on MDC was palpable throughout the trial. You know, the judge was so fixated at characterizing this case as a case of MDCT, members going out to kill policemen without looking at the available evidence. So, unfortunately, the case was unduly politicized. This is why there was no investigation as to who committed the crime. The concentration was at locking up people who were known to be associated with the MDC. They would go to their homes regardless of whether or not they were at Glenview 3 at the relevant time. So, for instance, he was at church, and it was shown that he was at church during that period. But they went and locked him up. His brother was visiting from Botswana and is not even a member of the MDC, was locked up, and he was one of those put on their defense when he actually had nothing whatsoever to do with politics on either side of the divide. And unfortunately, this is what we have seen for a very long time, where the law has been weaponized against opposition members, and where you see persons doing exactly the same thing but belonging to the ruling party, nothing happens.
Thank you. Any more questions? Shingi?
I wanted to ask regarding the litigation process. The law of witnesses, what would be, as lawyers, as the courts do with the witnesses who witnessed against the issue?
These were witnesses that were representing the state. So if we sue the state, certainly we will be suing on the basis of their agents who would have come and lied. But I think there's room for individual liability. I feel very, very strongly, for instance, that someone like Nyararai, who lied through his teeth, who perjured himself, that really the tax-paying public should not be paying damages on his behalf. Why shouldn't he be personally liable for lying in court for whatever reason? If he was put up to it, let him then go and claim those damages from those other people. But I think there ought to be personal liability for law enforcement that does things they know are illegal for political purposes. It is the only way we can clean our justice system, where people know that if I break Tunga's wrist, I'll be personally liable for that assault and the damages that come after that. Charles, you want to add anything to that?
Well, thank you so much. It's quite sad that we have had to come this far in this matter. It's quite regrettable. A lot has been said. What I want to avoid is to repeat what my sister Mtetwa has already said. But liability certainly must follow everybody who associates themselves with wrongdoing. Those are avenues that are obviously being thought about and will be pursued if they are feasible. But we wait to decide those issues in due course. At the moment, we're still allowing these gentlemen to relax, have a bit of time with their families. Then thereafter, they can make decisions going forward as to what their recourse is in the matter.
Thank you, Charlie. Blessed?
Thank you. My name is Blessed Mklana. From Newsday and Heart and Soul TV and radio. Madam Mtetwa, do you believe that at this point there is any political will to change and ensure that justice becomes for all and not for a selected few?
Well, when we look at what is happening, particularly at what is being referred to as anti-corruption courts at the magistrates' courts, which are illegal courts because there's no statute that actually says they are anti-corruption courts at the magistrates' court. We all know that when you go to those courts, you are done, you are finished. You will not get bail for weeks on end. You know that the prosecutors are independent and they will, defend the indefensible. And, most of the bail from those courts comes now where? From the High Court. There's no reason why we should not believe that when the trials ultimately start, the result will be the same. We do not expect that anyone will be acquitted by the ACC magistrates at the magistrates' court, because clearly they are following a script. So, as far as I'm concerned, if you are arrested and you are put in a so-called ACC court, even if your case is not an anti-corruption matter, and you will note that a lot of the cases that have been put in ACC courts are not corruption matters. They have been put in those courts for one reason only: deny them bail and convict them. So, with a scenario like that, I cannot say that in those particular courts there is justice. However, I'm not going to paint everyone with the same brush. We do have a sprinkling of very good magistrates who do the right thing, but they'll never get the cases that fit the certain category that they want certain results in. So you'll find that certain cases will certainly not go to certain magistrates, and all the so-called activist cases or politically motivated cases will go to the same kind of magistrates whose modus operandi is known. A system that is so clearly, predictable in how justice is done, where you know that if I appear before Mr. Nduna, I'll never get bail, can never be called just. So my answer to that is that I do not believe that our justice system is being handled in the way that it was envisaged in the Constitution. And that there are some magistrates certainly who look at the politics of the case as opposed to the law of the case. Charles, you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, just to explain that, when you look at this matter, one of the things that is regrettable is that an injustice has been done, not only to these two gentlemen and their families, it has also been done to the person who died. Why? Because there was a preoccupation by the state to pin the murder on the MDC. Within an hour of this incident, the police had rounded up all MDC activists in the area, put them in custody. They then abandoned all manner of investigation. Now the family deserve to know what happened to their relative, but they never got to know about it. Why? Because there was a misapplication of the entire investigation mechanism. So you find that happening even now. When something happens, small things happen, they are so preoccupied with just making sure that the person is arrested, they get to a criminal court, they are denied bail, they spend 60 days in custody, and so forth. So the trend, the footprints are the same in respect of all these matters. Where there's a mention of the MDC, you can be assured that the trend is the same. They are going to be treated in the same way. There's going to be very little investigation of the matter. The preoccupation, get the person in custody, keep them there, so that when they come out, they are an example to everybody else, that you don't mess with the system. So that's really what is happening. And you're going to see it for a long time.
Thank you. Any more questions, my brother? You will introduce yourself with your question.
My name is Madzokere, Channel Africa, SABC. From what you've just said, Madam Madzokere, I think you were trying to say that it is the duty of the court to discharge their duties in a transparent, free, and fair manner. And considering that the legal institutions have the mandate to provide that for the accused persons and even safeguard even the witnesses, do you think that at the end of the day our justice system is delivering transparently in a free, their duties in a transparent, free, and fair manner?
We desire so much to have a system that functions. The misfortune is that you're asking maybe the wrong people, because in the matters that we've been handling, we've not seen that. We are court officials. Our desire is that when we go to court, the law is certain. It is supposed to be certain. When we give advice to our clients, we are supposed to give them on the basis of a system that we know delivers certain outcomes, and the law can actually be administered in a particularly definitive way. But in the matters that we have handled so far, we have not seen any of that justice in terms of how delivery is done. We have been disappointed by the criminal justice system in its entirety, from the police station, when you go to the court, when you go to the prisons. Entirely we are not happy, we are not satisfied. Certainly in respect of the clients that we have been able to serve. We can't speak for everybody else. Maybe if you ask another lawyer who has handled some other matter, they'll probably say they are happy, but we are not, in respect of what has happened. These guys are a perfect example why we are not happy, why we don't think that justice has been served. If justice is delivered after 8 years, when people have been in custody, surely what can make up for what they have lost in terms of time, in terms of their ability to make their lives work, in terms of their families? So really, it's a serious indictment on the entire justice system.
Yeah, it's actually more like when you go to court with a criminal case, you know that whatever the prosecution says will be treated as gospel truth, and whatever the defense says in these kinds of cases will be treated with skepticism. As a result, there is no impetus on the other state organs to do things properly. Why should a policeman bother to investigate properly when they know that all they need to say is that, oh, I heard from my unnamed sources that, yes, this person was there. And the court does not treat that as hearsay, that's inadmissible. So the policeman will continue doing that. When the prosecutor knows that all he needs to stand up is to say, these are MDC violent people, and the court will believe that because the prosecutor has said so. So the justice delivery is manned from a whole process, as Charles says, from the police station right up to the courtroom. The stakes against those that are seen to be in the opposition are so high that it is virtually impossible to get justice, because what Mr. Nyazamba said every day in court, however ridiculous, fell onto very fertile ground, and the judge bought that. Charles will tell you the number of bail applications that were brought on the basis of information that then came out during the trial to be correct. And the judge never once castigated the police for lying. He never once said to Nyararai, why did you say you have eyewitnesses when you have not brought a single one of them? So clearly, the transparency you are talking about, the fairness you are talking about, the even-handedness you are talking about was absent in this case, and it is absent in a lot of similar cases seen to involve political activists in the opposition.
Thank you. Any more questions before we wind down? Yes, my brother.
Okay. I don't know if I'm allowed, but I'd like to ask the clients.
Yes, they are the ones who are supposed to be talking for themselves.
I wanted to ask you how you felt when you were convicted the first time, knowing that you were innocent, and how you are feeling now, 10 years later, being granted your freedom.
Yeah. When I was convicted, especially in politics. So isusu nokusungwa kwatakaita yenyaya yekuti tinoziva kuti inenge kuri tikangoti kuundermine democracy, and we do not expect kuti democracy rambe ichiundermine, especially with the autocratic leadership. But takazongozvigamuchira tikazosimbisa nenyaya yekuti taiwana solidarity support kubva kumaparty members, mafriends, macolleagues nehama, and especially in particular pamafriends akaita sana Hope Yegombo, ana ENK, KDK nevamwe vari kudiaspora. The list is endless and ndingakwanisa kuitaura yese because we spend the whole day tichilista solidarity support ataiwana. Like my party members, Honorable Madzokere, Honorable Tekeshe, Fadzai Madzokere, but the list is endless. Kusvika kugrassroots members, even local structures in party. But they want solidarity support. Takazofara straight. Tichinzwa kuti taakuitwa, and I express my profound gratitude to our lawyers, and in particular, this is Beatrice Mtetwa, Charles Kwaramba, Gift Mtisi, and Jeremiah Bam. Takaroti vangu waripo pataini festi chimurenga, yana vangadai vasina kuyengiwa. Competence yavakataridza, and I was also happy. But my happiness was short-lived. In fact, I was also happy because ndiri mujere takakwanisa kuitawo mastudies. Tichiri muri prison takazotora diploma in public relations and client services. Currently, ndikuita takutopedzisa degree program, Bachelor of Science Honors in Development Studies. Takakwanisa kunyorawo mabhuku ndiri mujere matatu. But handisati ndamapublisha nekuti ndinoti ndizobatsirwa nemaeditors. But I'm expecting kuti very soon atanga achipublishwa. Ndozvo zvatakakwanisa. Tikakwanisawo kuitawo zvimwe ndiri mujere. Ndaita chairperson weFootball Association yemujere. Ndikaita teacher we-O-level sociology. But my joy was short-lived. Ndasvika kumba nekuti ndakasvikawo mudzimai kusisina. Pamunoona kuti ndo maconsequences manje unlawful detention. Ane 8 months, asi mudzimai wangu anga akamira neni kwenguva yakareba, and taidanana taida kutombochata tiri mujeri, muchato wacho ukazokanzelewa. Handichanyo kublame zvangu nenyaya yekuti semunhu anga achiri wechidiki, pamwe akarudzawo hope akati munhu anenge achida kufarawo marriage. But ndakangosvika kumba iye asisiko neproperty yese yakatakurwa, zvokuti ke zvimwe zvandina pekutangira ndofunga munyatsoona kuti I'm very down. Handina pekutangira, ende vana vangu handisati ndakwanisa kuvaccessa kuti ndichivaonawo. Zvinhu zvandandakatarisira kuti ndichasvika kumba ndichifara, chinzonei ukama kuti taitya kukudza uri mujeri kuti pamwe waizofiitika zvakanaka. But zvinhu zvakatoitika manje muna November, sazvitori ne8 months. So ndo mamira zvakaita kuti ndakaenda kujeri ndiri emerit man, ndobuda mujeri ndabhachura.
Thank you, Kumatunga. Kuma last may want to say something in terms of what Leo has asked. How did you take your conviction and how did you take your being acquitted? And also the several things that you did while you were. I see journalist colleagues that the competition yanyanya in terms of Basabeduko. Kumatunga now he has a degree in public relations. We'll be competing with him. Kuma last.
Thank you. I just want to say it has been a disappointing experience. Our justice delivery system leaves a lot to be desired. From the arresting officers up to the end, we have political activists who are masquerading as judicial officers. So this matter has been politicized. If this matter was not politicized, a person like me was supposed to be released at the police station, because it was very clear to the police officers who arrested me that I had nothing to do with this case. Actually, at first, I was removed from the people who were supposed to appear in court. I was the first person who was arrested. But you can see that I'm not the first accused. The reason why I'm not the first accused is because initially they decided that there's no need for me to appear even at the initial court appearance. But when their bosses then came, they then say, because of my name, don't you know this one? This is last Maengahama. You can't let him go. So the matter was politicized from the word go. They were not interested in finding out who committed this crime. They just wanted to extract the political capital they can get. So all the people who have been involved in this matter, they've been working for the interest of a particular political ideology, political interest. So it's unfortunate that we have such a justice system in our country. We need to do something as Zimbabweans. I wouldn't want to see any other Zimbabwean to suffer the way I suffered. My prayer is that I must be the last person to endure this kind of suffering. It's not fair. This is witchcraft. You cannot take someone who was in a church worshipping and then take him to prison. And the judge was actually pretending as if he did us a favor by not sentencing us to death. He actually wanted us to be killed. So we could have been killed for a crime we know nothing about because of the kind of the justice system we have. So I wouldn't want anyone after me to go through what I went through. So this must stop. Our police, our prosecutors, our judges, everyone who is involved in delivering justice, they must be professional. They are there to serve the interest of the country, not the interest of individuals or a political party. So I think this is a message that we must send as Zimbabweans. This is not an issue about me and Tunga and our lawyers. It's an issue for all Zimbabweans. I think every Zimbabwean is a potential victim to this. You may think today it's about us, but tomorrow it can be in our situation. So I think we must send a strong message that we do not want such a justice delivery system. Zimbabwe deserves better.
Koma last, just like Tunga, you were also studying while in detention, is it?
Yes.
Tell us what were you at the stage?
Well, in 2017, I enrolled for a degree program with the Zimbabwe Open University. So I'm in my 4th year. This is my last semester. So I'm expecting to graduate at the end of this year in the theology and religious studies.
Thank you, LJ.
All right, I'd like to introduce you once again. I think the question is to you, Ngomalast. I understand you're a pastor now, or you've been a pastor or a man of God. Looking at what happened to you and probably your family and everything that has happened, do you forgive the state and the people that push you through this? We're talking from a religious point of view. And then we also want to know the way you guys were treated in prison. Was it different from the rest of the people, since yours was sort of a political case? Were you treated differently in a bad manner or maybe a good way?
Well, when you are a political prisoner, they treat you worse than in armed robbery. You are a threat to them. So even the way your visitors are conducted, even some of the privileges or the rights you are supposed to get as a prisoner, when it's yourself, your issues are not handled by junior officers. Everything, any small thing, the officer in charge has to be involved. So it's very, very difficult to be a political prisoner in this country because you are seen as someone who is very, very dangerous. Even when we are taken to courts, the number of escorts you are given is times 10 the number of escorts that is given to other inmates. So it's very, very traumatizing, the way they will be doing, the way they will be treating you as a political prisoner. So yes, we were treated differently in a negative way.
And then maybe, do you forgive the state for what they put you through, or everyone else who put you through this?
Of course, we forgive them. Our focus is not on an individual, but our focus is on the system. Some of these people, you can just tell that they are not doing it from their heart, but they are just have to comply with the dictates of the system. So it is our system that is rotten. It is our system that has to be transformed. So our justice delivery system, or even our prison system, has to be transformed, and individuals will follow suit.
Thank you, Prili.
Maybe my name is Privilege Mshani, Deutsche Welle, the German International Broadcast. Just to, in brief, to paint a picture of what it is to be in our prisons. You spent 10 years. I think if it was in terms of seniority, they could have, the people could be saying that you were a senior in prison. How is it being in our prisons?
To be in prison just for a day. If you are in prison for a day and you manage to survive that day, if you have not converted, then you have to start believing in God. The situation in prison is designed in such a way that the moment you step into a prison, you are dead. You start by dying spiritually, then you die physically in terms of everything. The kind of water you drink there, the kind of blankets you are given, the kind of clothes, where you sleep. You would not believe it if I tell you that the space that I was given to sleep, it's plus or minus 30 centimeters. That is my space. So 30 centimeters, then another person, 30 centimeters, another 30 person. For all those years, this is how you will be sleeping. So it's very, very terrible. Our prison system is focusing on the punishment and the retribution. There is zero when it comes to rehabilitation and correcting offenders. So that's why you find out that reoffending is getting high. When someone gets into a prison, those criminals, the next day you find them getting back to the prison, because the prison system is not designed in such a way that inmates are corrected and rehabilitated. For example, the education we are talking about, it has nothing to do with the prison system. We have been doing it as individuals. Whether it was supposed to be the responsibility of the prison to facilitate every inmate who wants to study something. They were supposed to be paying our fees. They were supposed to be providing us with learning materials, but we were doing it on our own. They were actually frustrating us because there are so many security measures that you have to go through. Your books are censored. Your assignments are actually censored. Can you imagine? When you are writing an assignment to a professor who should mark it, then a Form 2 Jerry Guard wants to censor that assignment. It's very unfortunate.
Quite said. I think last question, then we come to the end. I think you also need to do rush to other assignments. Last question.
Okay, so I want to thank Madzokere very much. I still been in prison maximum. I went through the very same ordeal. I said 5 years only to be acquitted at the Supreme Court as a self-actor. The first thing, our media have not been doing enough to highlight these issues. That's number one. I want to thank you very much, Madzokere. You know, it was tough. I managed to survive, and I pray that God will lead you. Yes, it is a difficult system, but we can still do something. We have to look at a life beyond the camera, beyond where you are. You've got a life to move on, and I pray that you will really move on.
Thank you.
I also want to add what Dr. Maengahama said about the integration process is virtually present. It's not everything which is great, because actually our prison systems because there are also some officers like the medical staff, manesi acho nemadhokta acho nechipi, they are very very competent, but panenge pachileka kana kuti medication, because prison inokwanisa kutoshayiwa kana mapirizi zvakaita kana separasite zvakungofanira nemumba munoshayikwa salt. Mamwe maofficers acho anotoedzawo kutorehabilitata vanhu zvakaita se-education department but haina zvikwanisiro. Library yacho nema-outdated books asingakwanisi kuwanikwa mumasyllabus even secondary kana primary, because pane primary vamwe vanenge vachistarta primary level, vamwe secondary level, vamwe tertiary level. But unoona kuti pane mamwe officers anenge achitoda basa ravo anenge ari very competent, but zvikwanisiro pane mabig challenges kuti jeri harina maresources, and havamacautious. Imwe nyaya yavanje ndeye congestion, because kunogara kuchiitwa zvango maamnesty vachitaura kuti vanoda kuti decongest vanhu, and tinonzwa spokesperson wejeri achiti jeri rine capacity yekuchengeta vanhu 17,000. Tisingazivi kuti capacity yavari kutaura ndeyekupa nzvimbo yekurara here, because havana capacity yekupa chikafu. They don't meet the heritage scale. Unbalanced meals ari pa-dietary scale iri well defined in the Prison Act. Havakwanisi kuimita iyoyo, because tutori nefood insecurity just because inenge ari unbalanced diet. Havakwanisi kupfekedza vasungwa sezvazvakanyorwa futi muzati provision yekuti clothing vanofanira kunge vachiwana 2 pairs dzemashorts, 2 pairs dzematrousers, panongopiwa macanvas 1 pair dzinogara dzakabharuka to the extent yekutoti munokwanisa kuona mamwe maprisoners ukasatengerwa nevehama kana nesolidarity vanenge vachiprovidewo solidarity kwamuri, munoona munhu akatoisa slippers kuvharidzira shoti rinenge rakabharuka. Saka they don't have the capacity yekuchengeta even more than 1,000 inmates, not 17,000 inmates dzavari kutaura. Hapana capacity iyo. Pese panoitwa amnesty pakwanise kutodecongesta those prisons, because vanobuda vacho it's a small fraction, vanenge within a week pane patoya vakatowandisa kudarika vakabuda vacho.
Yes, I have one last question. My name is Marshall from Zimbabwe. You were wrongfully incarcerated for 10 years. So after coming out, coming out as free people, does it strengthen your resolve as a political activist where you're not going to politics because of what you suffered?
Yeah, politics, and I believe it's a calling. Kana munhu achinge atopinda mujeri adawezokwanisa kutomustrengthena nenyaya yekuti it's a calling, yekuti tichida kuti tifaitire for human rights at the same time kuimprove malivelihoods evanhu.
So are you still going to political activity?
Yes.
I think you're also waiting for a last response. Last, you may want to respond. You will continue exercising your political rights.
Yeah, I think I'm more than resolved than before. I now to be an activist. I now see the need that every Zimbabwean must take part in trying to create the type of Zimbabwe we want. So my time in prison exposed me to that necessity. It gives me that resolve that I have to do more, if not times 1,000 what I've been doing. Not for myself, but for our coming generation. You know, when our kids will ask us, where were you when these things were happening, what would we say? So I have an answer, I have an obligation to create a future for my kids, not for myself.
Thank you. Thank you, Madzokere. Well done, eh?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, colleagues, members of the media. Thank you.